I spent 6 days shooting in Theodore Roosevelt National Park during my road trip of September 2021. And that was the longest that I had stayed in any one spot on that road trip, which was great. I loved that. This is Latitude Photography Podcast, episode 135 for November 21, 2021. Hello and thank you for joining me here on Latitude Photography Podcast. Once again, we are broadcasting both in the YouTube space where you can see all the slides and all the pictures from this experience, and of course in the audio only like we've been doing for the previous 134 episodes, this being episode 135. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad you're here. The Latitude Photography Podcast is the place where travel outdoor photographers come to, well, hopefully be inspired, learn a little bit, but also I'd love the opportunity to make you think about your images, make you think about your process, think about what you're doing with your image making, and reach out if that's something you'd love to do. If you have a question or anything like that, Brent at latitudephotographypodcast.com. And I would love to hear your questions and your thoughts and your ideas. And of course, think about joining that Facebook group too. We have the Facebook group where we put some pictures in there. I have a challenge going on right now saying, look, here we are at the end of the year. You know, if you need to take this into January, by all means, go ahead. But I'm going to be doing this myself. I want to challenge everyone listening, everyone watching, to take a look at your images for the year. And let's just take stock of what you did and make a collection of images and go ahead and throw them in the Facebook group for Latitude Photography Podcast. And when you do that, we of course are going to hopefully be inspired, but I also want to go one last little tidbit extra, and that is to say, tell us how you grew over this last year, how you grew in your photography. Maybe you sidestepped into a different genre. Maybe you advanced the genre that you normally shoot in. Just tell us what your growth phase was. I want to be able to celebrate that with you all. And so get that in there. And of course, I'll be doing the same thing. Although I see mine coming out in January, so I can have some time to look through all these items. This is going to be very difficult for me to do, to weed it all down to about no more than 20 images that represent the experience of this year, because of this road trip, I shot so much. And of course, some earlier in the year, of course, too, that I don't want to forget. So it's going to be a great thing to see all those images coming in. So let's see all those images coming in for your year end or year review, however you want to call it, posting those in the Facebook group. Let's get started with this idea of the trip here, going to Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So here's a quick little map that you can look at in this, well, I guess technically the second slide, if you're following along in the Facebook group with the slide items. If you're here on YouTube watching the video, of course, this is what we're looking at. So TRNP, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, North Dakota. You can see how the highways are splitting across there, 90 coming up on the lower left hand of the frame there. But I have it marked off relatively in the middle of the slide here, TRNP South Unit. That's where I spent all my time. There are actually 3 units. I don't have the other item here listed, the Elkhorn Ranch listed. It is between the North Unit and the South Unit. And you can see it's right along Highway 94. A different map. This is provided by the National Park Service. You can see it does have the Elkhorn Ranch placed in there. But if you wanted to go up to the North Unit, you just take Highway 85. You take 94 to 85. You drive north. You go to towards, I should say, Watford City. And the North Unit is before you get to Watford City. The Little Missouri River is flowing between both of these sections of the park. And certainly in the springtime, it's going to be a lot more prominent. When I was there, I don't think I got any images that included the river that I was excited about. It was just hardly any water. And that's just not where I focused my attention, which was odd. I usually love to include water in my images. But here at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, I just really didn't do much of that. So let's talk about a few facts here. The South Unit is comprised of 46,158 acres and change. North Unit, 24,000 acres, 24,070 acres. The Elkhorn Ranch Unit, this is where Theodore Roosevelt actually had his ranch, his, where he lived, where he stayed, where he had his cattle ranching enterprise. He wasn't there all the time, but he had some money and he bought this location. He had people managing it for him. And this was where, the actual ranch really was. All right, some designations. Basically, how did it morph into a national park? Well, it was the Roosevelt Recreation Demonstration Area starting in 1935. So that's a long time ago, relatively speaking. And then it became Theodore Roosevelt National Wildlife Refuge in November of 1946. Then it became a National Memorial Park in April 25 of 1947. So fairly quickly there, upgrading it to this memorial park. And then Theodore Roosevelt National Park, final designation as a full-on park, one of the currently 63 parks in our park system. There's over 400, 423? I can't remember. Over 400 properties in the national park system that are managed by the National Park Service. But as far as those areas that are fully designated national parks, there's 63. All right, so it became a full-on national park there on November 10, 1978. All right, let's take a look at the entire park visits. They're in 2019, like I've done with the other parks that I visited, and I will do with Badlands National Park when I get to that next week. We're going to be looking at 2019 numbers because that is the last year of what we have as normal history of coming up to the visitations for the park. Now, I did look at the 2020 numbers, and it's interesting because here in 2019, there's 691,658 visits for Theodore Roosevelt. And this is the entire park. We're not talking about just the South Unit or the North Unit. This is the entire park. Now, this is another thing I'm unable to determine. If people go to both units, do they get counted twice? I would presume that to be the case because they are two distinctly separate units, and I just think it would be difficult to track, oh, were you also down there at the South Unit? Because then you don't get counted up here at the North Unit or vice versa. So I'm going to go ahead and say this probably includes some double counting of people as well, but let's just go ahead and take their numbers for what they are. I did look at the 2020 numbers, and they did not dip as far as I thought they would have dipped. But being that this is a fairly remote park anyway, and pretty much most of the parks largely stayed, I should say many of the parks during 2020 largely stayed open. This one, it seems, didn't do any research, but it seems like it stayed open pretty much the whole time during everything else being shut down. And I remember getting really ticked off thinking, why are they closing the wilderness? If anything, during a pandemic, the wilderness is where you need to go. But anyway, rant over. It is rank number 31. So there's a 31st most popular, if you will, pretty much smack dab in the middle of our 63 parks. It ranks number 31 in overall visitation. A little bit about the plant life and such. There are 400 species of plants found within the park. And again, this is both units. Most of it, of course, is grassland. So you have vast varieties of grass and things like that. Common animals that you will find. Certainly bison are probably the most common icon, I guess we could say. When you look at their stickers and their postcards and all sorts of things that they have at the park, the bison dominates. T-shirts, all sorts of things. The bison definitely dominates. There are actually some elk there. I did see a few elk. I didn't get to photograph any. They were off, they were running and whatnot, so I didn't get to photograph any, but I did get to see some elk. Tons of prairie dogs. Definitely some coyotes, badgers. I didn't get to see any badgers. Wild horses, yes, I definitely saw some wild horses, and Texas longhorns. I believe I saw one of those, but didn't photograph it. And these items, these two, the horse and the Texas longhorn cattle, they are not native to the area, but they've decided to keep them around for the historic factor of what Theodore Roosevelt had been doing and what he brought to the area. He brought the horses, he brought the cattle. And so now there's some feral horses, I'll just call them wild horses. And of course, the same idea with the cattle. They're wandering about there. Now, as far as the horses, I saw, I would say in the neighborhood of 15 to 20. And I saw them a couple, 3 times throughout the time there. There are some bighorn sheep. If I saw any. And then there's also some pronghorn. I don't have that listed here, but there's some pronghorn and then just some regular old deer. I think they're black-tailed deer. All right. Oh, I also had the map up here on this slide because I wanted to just give a sense of the South Unit, of where I was able to be. I camped at that place called Cottonwood Campground. That's the only campground within the South Unit. And then that ring road was actually closed from where it says Peaceful Valley Ranch on the map. If you backtrack down that road towards Cottonwood, and then you take a right up the road. I didn't go up that direction because it was pretty much closed almost immediately after that. But then you could drive all the way around the ring road to the Badlands Overlook, and then you'd be able to stop there, turn around, and come back out. And the reason is they had some erosion. The road was just sliding away from the land, eroding underneath it, and so they needed to have some time to fix it, of course. I did get down to the Painted Canyon area, Buck Hill, Colvain, Boycourt Trail, Peaceful Valley Ranch started a thing there. I did do some shooting at the Wind Canyon Trail, but never, whatever I shot, that's one of the places where I was composing up the river, and it just didn't come out right. Things are fine. It just didn't come to the point of saying, I actually want to show these pictures. And then one area that's not listed here specifically on this map, in the far west of the park here, where that one little trail leads off to the edge, that's where the Petrified Forest area is, and I did get lots of awesome stuff there. But let's start our journey in this next item where we see the first photograph with Painted Canyon. So I arrived in the afternoon. I was able to get a camp set up. And then I was like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? And when I'm first at a place like this, I usually like to go someplace simple, someplace that is, I guess, in general, more iconic, you could say, because Painted Canyon, you don't need to pay the fee to get into the park if you're at Painted Canyon, because it's also a rest area right on Highway 94, Interstate 94. And so while I've already gone into the camp, set up camp and everything, and then I backtracked, came back out, got on the highway, zipped on out one exit's worth, got off the exit, parked there, talked very briefly with the folk at the visitor center, because they have a visitor center there as well, and then fired off onto the trail. And this is where the ranger at the visitor center, she was saying, sure, just go follow the canyon rim, and then you'll see the trail, and it'll go down into the canyon. I thought, okay, cool. So I did that, and trails were just going everywhere, crisscrossing, doing this and that, and doing everything. And so this is just one of those trails that I was like, okay, I'm gonna go down this way. This looks fun. Well, these are pretty much unofficial trails. I would maybe game trails, wildlife trails. Certainly they have been used by hikers quite a bit, but I really liked the idea of a little bit of fall color coming in where there's the shrubbery, the trail leading you in. It's a nice S curve, some beautiful greenery coming through. And on this image, I was processing it pretty much the day after Adobe released their upgrade for Lightroom, where you have all this new masking functions. And so I was able to select just the shadows areas only, and then have it radiate out, if you will, to taper off, to feather off as the tones get brighter. And then I can focus all my edits just on the shadows and brighten just the shadows up, maybe warm them up a little bit, because it's very common for the shadows to come across cool where the other tones don't come across so cool. And so I was able to work with just the shadows in this image, and I thought that was really nice. Of course, you can think, well, can't you just slide the shadows slider? Of course you can. This has a different effect, though, when you're targeting just the shadows and you have all those controls available to you with just within that luminance range. That's what we call it, the luminance range mask. It's a wonderful feature, and I really appreciate the added functionality that we have in editing our photos in Lightroom. And I'll certainly be doing some videos for the YouTube channel as time goes on, because it's just an amazing functionality. I love it. One of the greatest things about this location, Theodore Roosevelt National Park, and of course Badlands National Park, are these bentonite clay badlands features, these little areas. In this case, it's a very small area. This foreground element that's standing here before me, if you were to go from the bottom of the photograph to the top, the little crown of that item, maybe that's in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 inches, somewhere in there. So this is a very small little vignette of the entire area. Got in with some really shallow depth of field, and just focused in on that one little piece, and then got, the rest of it just setting the stage, setting the environment for where this is and what this is, I should say. But it really comes down to that texture, those lines, those colors. When you go to a new place, when I go to a new place, sometimes you might just I feel a little bit of overload. And that's what we're kind of going to be looking at today with all these pictures. A little bit of overload and saying there's just so many cool things that I'm just not used to seeing. I'm not used to shooting. Like in this next shot where we step way back from this Badlands form, and we do have the little textural items coming through, the crackling clay, if I can keep my tongue untied. But then you've got these bushes that are just somehow locked into the clay. Their roots go deep enough, of course, to get some moisture and nutrients. Some are dead. Most of them are still, much alive. But that erosion is still certainly happening, still very prominent with all those erosion lines coming down. And, this is decades worth of erosion coming through here. And to isolate that and to just see all these lines, see the color, see the horizontal banding. Oh, this is just one of those things that if you're into geology at all, this type of image probably just really excites you, because you have those different bands of the different minerals, the different types of clay, dirt, sandstone, and stuff coming through, and they have different erosion rates and different erosion patterns. And we're going to see a lot of those different types of images in addition to grasslands and some wildlife and other things like that too. But there's just a lot of really cool things happening in the landscape as the erosion is happening. Here's a nice, interesting study where we don't have any plant life in this next slide, where it's just these things it's like it's melting. And the full color image, again, we see the color in the banding going on, horizontal banding. And then I did a full black and white conversion, and then a black and white conversion with a little bit of color grading, slight cooling color grading applied. Thought that was just kind of a fun thing to work on. I'm also a big fan of details. And this next slide, we have just some details of that clay. Basically, I'm just hovering right over it, shooting straight down onto this little twig, this little item that's kind of a root, I guess we can say. It's just laying there, though, on this little twig, just laying there on the clay. And then we have the clay with different tonal values, some darker tonal values, some brighter tonal values. Most of it is really got this little tiny crack, so it feels a little bit rough. But then off to the far right-hand side, there's this one that's really smooth. And there's just all this different formations and lines and primary lines and secondary lines and whatnot. Really just provides, to me, a huge level of interest in just understanding the details of what makes up this overall landscape. Good stuff. As I'm going about, and again, I had mentioned, I had 6 nights there. So when was it? I showed up on a Sunday and then I left on a Saturday. So 6 nights there of just amazing 6 days shooting, whatever you want to call it. Just an amazing sense of all this eye candy, all this stuff that is just new to me. And I had already been kind of in the groove for 2 weeks shooting at these other locations, Minnesota's North Shore and Isle Royale National Park. And so it was just more continuation of that in the groove kind of thing. But I was able to really sink my teeth deep into it because I was there in one location for so long. I didn't have to worry about moving camp or anything like that. And my sole purpose, my sole job was just to go out and make pictures and not worry about anything else. It was really a delight. Fantastic. All right. Those images that I just showed you were from, actually, I should have clarified a little bit. They were from Sunday evening and going into Monday morning. I went back Monday morning to the Painted Valley, the Painted Canyon. And so Monday afternoon, after lunch and probably a nap, I have to check my notes, but I probably took a nap since I woke up so early. I then went out to this little location. You can see where my campground is, Cottonwood Campground on the map. You just drive up the road a little bit, go to Peaceful Valley Ranch, and then take the trail off that way. Now, you can certainly look at it and say, well, Brent, why don't you just take the campground trail. So there's this trail, this Madahe Trail that leads really close to the campground. Well, you have to cross the river, which is no big deal. The river was very shallow there. But I just wanted to see what this other little spot was. When I was looking at things there just across camp, it was just a trail through the grasslands. And I knew with the contours on the map and such, there's a little more of that landscape interest type stuff starting out at Peaceful Valley Ranch, cross the river and get into it really quickly. So you can then see on the map here, I did this loop. So we'll start here at the Peaceful Valley Ranch, cross the river, go on this Ekblom Trail, which goes through a prairie dog town. There's like 4, I think, prairie dog towns just on this one hike alone. And then go up the Madahe Trail to the Plateau Trail and come back on the Plateau Trail. All right, so this first shot, Ekblom Trail, there were so many of these guys, and you're just walking right through. I mean, the trail, there's many places where the trail is literally inches from a hole in the ground where these prairie dogs will just use as their home, of course. And then it's just spread out all over the place, and you're walking right through it. They have this little chirp they're going on and whatnot. So this is where I started using for the first time, kind of convinced myself, this R5, this Canon R5, it's got the eye control, or I should say the eye tracking focus. Why don't I try that out? And so I did, and I've got a little bit of learning to do on the exact settings and everything. After the first initial few shots, I was like, okay, this is actually pretty good. This is working decently well. I really like this. And it just really nailed, when it's finally active and fully doing what it needs to do, it really nailed those shots. And any fault of the system, I put completely on my own self, because I have to admit, I'm not huge into the wildlife photography, but with about, I'm going to say, less than 5 minutes, I had it nailed in, and everything was just clicking. It was perfect. And so I really appreciate that feature on the R5. And of course, the R6 has it as well. Plenty of Sony cameras have it, where it tracks the eye, it tracks the body, animals or people or face or whatever like that. So it's a great function to have working for us in our photography today. On up the Madahe Trail. Now, this might actually be just before the Madahe Trail. It's either right after I turned. I was looking at the map, because I track it with my watch, and I was looking at the map. I couldn't really tell. I was like, maybe this is still the Ekblom Trail, but maybe it's Madahe Trail. And I decided to list it as Madahe Trail. And just, the nice breadth of the Badlands formations. And in this case here, it doesn't feel, quote, Badlands-like we have already seen some of those images with the huge amount of erosion. And that's a neat thing about Theodore Roosevelt National Park. You have this variety, a vast variety of what the Badlands are and what the Badland formations do and how they erode and what they look like, and therefore the plant life that they support. And so here we've got a 3 or 4, I think it's a 4 or 5 frame pano, and just all that wonderful fall color coming in with the hills behind it, some great clouds behind that. And then a few minutes after that, some awesome thunderstorms started coming in. Now, thankfully, this didn't really pelt me bad. It looks a little more menacing than it actually was. And this looks like I remember it looking. Don't get me wrong. I did not make this look worse than it did look to me there when I was there. I was just like, oh, you've got to be kidding, because I've had so much rain this whole time, which if I were to do this all over again, I don't think I would change a thing, because the rain, the weather, that really makes some interesting images. And so I was really happy. It's just, if it gets to be too much of a rain, then I'm just like, oh, please, come on. Have mercy, please. But this did rain on me twice during this hike, but thankfully it never came to the point where it was just a full-on deluge. And just again, thinking about the idea of the image, I really liked how that light was coming in nice and bright on those hills in the background, the trail leading us up towards it. And then of course the clouds, everything was just like, I'm just hiking up the trail. I was like, this is gorgeous. I need to take a shot of this somehow. And so I got this shot, and then a few more feet up the trail, I got this shot. And I really liked on this particular shot, the trail is straighter. So it's like, whatever. I liked in the previous shot, that curve of the trail. But on this one, I've got a little bit of that anchoring element, that bush on the left-hand side, kind of leaning out to the left, and the trail just doing its thing. And then, of course, you don't hardly ever see it, really. But on the right-hand side, we've got that curved piece of grass that's kind of keeping you in. It's in a darker area off to the right, but we have that curved piece. It's just like a little gentle visual reminder. Look that way. If you wander, look over there. That's where the interesting stuff is. It's just really fun when those things come together like that. But this is a little more zoomed in, so we don't have the monstrosity of the clouds above us and things like that. It's a little more zoomed in, so we have the dark clouds, but just not the excitement in the clouds. So this is a little more calming of an image, but still a nice memory of the day, and I think it looks good too. All right, going on up the Mater Dei Trail, you're going up this hill, then you take a sharp right turn and you start going down the Plateau Trail. And this was where it started to really get interesting. And so the clouds had moved. As you can see, I'm shifting my direction of where I'm looking, but also the clouds had moved to where I was basically. And so now I had some sun to the side of me and a little bit clear behind me. To the north, it was clear behind me. But of course, here the sun is coming from the west, as we are Monday afternoon after all, getting a little bit of that fall color, some good landscape formations coming in. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, bang, here comes this rainbow. And I was just like, and I'm running down the trail. They're at the start of the Plateau Trail, because you think, Plateau Trail is just going to be straight and level, right? Well, at the very start of it, where it was joining up with the Mater Dei Trail, there was a bit of a downhill, and I'm running around trying to find a good, nice place to get a good foreground. And so I shot this several times as I'm moving down and getting closer to this plateau region. And so this particular shot, 3-frame horizontal pano, so I could get the double rainbow and the breadth of that landscape. And it's just, I find it to be really pleasing. I'm super glad I got this shot. I just would have liked it if I could have had something like that rock in the previous image also in the frame, but this is pretty well capturing the lay of the land for sure, as well. All right, the next day, so I on that hike, finished up at around sunset, went to camp, went to bed after a brief supper. Tuesday, I did get myself to the Badlands Overlook, but we're not going to see any of them from here today. It was a nice place, but it just wasn't something that really floated my boat with the light that I was finding and other things like that. It didn't work out today. So I went to the Colvain Nature Trail for the rest of the morning, and then I went to Buck Hill for the evening. And so that's where we have these items shown prominently here on the map. So this is going to be Tuesday. So let's take a look at some of these images. So here with the Colvain Nature Trail, I posted this image to my Facebook group, and I made a comment that I just didn't think it would make a very good print. And the biggest problem in it, and I verified it, the biggest problem is it looks fine on small resolution, but there's just a little bit down here in the where that tree is in the corner. There's just a little bit of, it's just not sharp enough. I know that if I were to make this a print, I would want that to be a little bit sharper. And it's not sharp in the sense of motion blur because of, some kind of wind blowing or something like that. It's all about the depth of field in the shot. I'm shooting at roughly, what was this, 200 millimeters maybe or so? I honestly can't remember. Probably a little bit more, closer to 300. But that object is considerably fairly close to me compared to the moon and the background elements. If I had gotten, a focus stack to where I could have focused on that instead and graphed that in, that would have been amazing. And I would have been able to have that whole foreground element hill and everything be in sharp focus, but it's just a touch soft. And so that's where I'm just like, yeah, okay, I can look at that and say, Brent, your technique stinks. You need to do better next time. And of course, we're always learning, as a design educator, as a photographer. I view this much in the same idea of practicing something. When you talk to a doctor or a lawyer, they say they're practicing medicine or they're practicing law. They have the super advanced degree. They have the professional experience. I've been shooting for over 20 years, but this is still a practice kind of an idea. And sometimes, and we're going to talk about this in a future episode, sometimes we still feel too rushed. Sometimes we still overlook things that we shouldn't be overlooking. And so this is one of those things to where I'm thrilled to show you this image here. But if I were to make a nice big print and try and put it on my wall, and by big, I mean the neighborhood of 11 by 16 or so, 11 by 14, this exact framing wouldn't work 11 by 14. I'd have to crop that tree off and then it'd be super boring. But anyway, if I were to make this a big print, I just know that that's a little too soft and it just doesn't work. But again, here on full HD resolution, you can probably tell, yeah, that's a little soft, but you're not bothered by it. I just have different expectations, I guess, when I go to the printing process. But otherwise, this came out, I think, pretty decently well. And then after a few minutes, it cleared off a little bit. So literally it was just 5 minutes, and then the whatever haze was there on the horizon, it just evaporated. And then I ended up getting this shot. Now, on this one, everything is in nice sharp focus. This could make a nice big print because we don't have anything advancing towards us. So that tree down in the left-hand corner is going to be just as sharp as the moon, is just as sharp as the ridge. I just don't like the lighting, and I don't like the composition as well in this one as I did the other one. But it's still a very, very pleasing image, and I have otherwise no serious complaints about it. As you walk along the Colvain Trail, what's interesting in this place is the whole idea that the nature of the place. About 30 or so years ago, I forget exactly now, but 30 or so years ago, there was this huge coal vein that was burning, and then it finally burned out. It fizzled out. Well, what happened, and we'll see in a few images here in just a few more slides, the coal is in the ground, it's burning, and then the ground basically collapses underneath it. And it also destroys all the vegetation, and then it has to regrow and everything else like that. And so we're in the process of regrowth. And so here, basically, we just have some of the exposed erosion areas, some of the regrowth coming through, but there's no actual burning coal right now in this area. There's burning coal elsewhere, but not specifically in this area. Just after I left the Colvain Nature Trail and I was starting to head back, I saw all these horses. I was like, oh, awesome. But they're just out there in the field and they're just munching on grass and everything else like that. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, let's see what happens. And so I'm there for better part of a half hour, closer to 45 minutes. And other photographers come and go. They're just snapping and leaving. A couple of them stayed a little longer. One of them walked out on this lower image on this slide. You can see there's a hill behind these initial horses. There was the herd was split in two, basically. So half of them were behind that little hill. The other half were in front of the hill. I did not feel myself comfortable walking out behind them to go hunt them down and such, but also probably just because of the footwear I had on. I was using my Keens, which when you're walking in the grasses like that, not the best thing. On a trail, no big deal. But if you're just cutting across the grass, they itch and scratch and whatnot, and it's no fun. So I'm going along, and this is where, again, with a wildlife idea, lesson learned, just switch it to the eye control focus already. Because, and then also be real quick on the button or do something about switching it to the constant autofocus or the AI servo autofocus. So it's just always focusing, always hunting for that eye. Because as I'm there and things are going along, all of a sudden this coyote is chasing a deer in the background and these horses just start galloping directly towards me. And they probably came within 6 feet of me. Some of them, not all of them, obviously, but some of them. And I looked at my images from that stampede directly towards me, and I could have showed you some, but just not images I'm proud of. So I held them back, because I didn't have it convert. I didn't have the thing switched over. And so when that action came, I lost out. So lesson to all y'all, if you're shooting, even if it's something that's docile, go ahead and switch over to that eye-controlled focus anyway, because you never know what's going to happen. There might be some action, some activity that just happens really quick, and you just got to grab it. So what we have here, they ran past me. Well, we have some rather stoic images, a rather stoic image of just them grazing, but then they ran past me up the hill. And so I got them cresting the hill as the light's coming in, of course, like it is, nice and angled. And one horse is leading the pack, leading the way. So good experience, probably a good story to tell. But as far as that action image of them coming towards me, no, I didn't get that because I didn't switch the camera over. And I know it does really well. I've seen a lot of photographers posting online of how awesome this tool, this functionality performs. And yeah, I wasn't using it. This was the first time. I mean, I had gotten that camera just days before, a couple of weeks before this trip happened. So I guess I shouldn't be too hard on myself, except for I should have, of course, gone out and done some shooting beforehand, but that's just not the way it turned out. All right, so for the evening time, I actually went to two different locations. The first location was a collection of hills, walked up one, came back down to the parking lot, walked up the other, and it just didn't work out so well. So then I went to Buck Hill, and it's basically the same type of arrangement, but what I finally contemplated was to say, you know what, the landscape, the stretch of the lay of the land isn't really doing it for me. What I need to really look at is what's right here at my feet. And so there were these interesting sandstone rock formations, and this is a 2-frame pano that I composed and shot as 2 frames, stitched them together in Lightroom. And I really just loved the crisscrossing lines. And then, of course, the texture in the rock, but the crisscrossing lines, that's what's really strong. And of course, the lighting and all that good stuff. But in roughly the center, a little bit left of center along the horizon, you can see this little tower out there. It's out of focus because of the depth of field. But as I'm looking to the southeast in this frame, and I'm on the southern edge of the park already, there's a radio tower there. It's either a cell phone tower or some other microwave tower, because Interstate 94 is going right along that way. And you can hear the interstate from this location, especially if there's semi-trucks going by. So you don't have that peace and tranquil sense of the park when you're in this location. And then, of course, if you're shooting to the southeast, you potentially get some man-made objects in your frame. I could easily clone that out. I just wanted to kind of show what it was like in this particular part of the park. Now, take roughly a 180-degree turn, and then you get this view here. And shooting into the sun, and did a 2-frame mashup. Now, this is a single frame overall. I just cropped off the bottom. It was boring and didn't need it, so I cropped off the bottom. But this is the kind of thing where when I'm taking a shot like this, I'll take my finger and block the sun, so it allows me to grab the rest of the foreground without the flare. And then I'll take my finger away, I'll grab the shot, and then I'll blend those in Photoshop so that I can have that massive, beautiful sun coming in, but the rest of the scene isn't destroyed with all the flare that's happening in the lens. So we still have some flare happening. It's just not out here in the shadows areas. That's my biggest point, I guess, on that. But again, we can still see, since we're at the southern edge of the park and we have I-94 going along on the far left side, just above that dark ridge, but below the horizon line, there's another tower. And then, closer to the sun, there's 2 towers you can see. So again, just another one of those ideas, the idea we talked about in a previous episode, we were looking at the idea of wilderness and what it means to be designated a wilderness area versus just a national park. And the wilderness designation keeps those things away. Now, of course, we do have the boundary that we have to deal with. So those things, those man-made objects can come up to it. It's just when you're in the wilderness section of Theodore Roosevelt National Park, which is largely the western section of the south unit of the park, you tend to not have those things as prominently viewable. Where when you're in the non-wilderness area, where it's more developed, here in the southeast section of the south unit, you tend to see those things because Highway 94 is right there, but also just because of what they've done in the park anyway. So you can have accessibility and whatnot. The beautiful color, this is what makes it for me in this image from Buck Hill, the gorgeous color of that sun coming in, and then that rim light on that foreground hill is just, it just really sets up that layering effect for me. And then of course the rays that are from the sun that are transferring the visual energy from layer to layer, from these different layers that are happening in the hill, in the landscape. And it just creates that dynamic sense that my eye really appreciates, and it's lovely to see. And I'm just glad it came out. On Wednesday, I started on the Boycourt Trail. And so on this map, you can see again where the Cottonwood Campground is. You drive up, you go over. And what's interesting, I don't know if I should say this or not, but on my National Geographic map, they have the Boycourt Trail actually starting, if you were to look at it and lay it over on this one, they have it where the T of the word trail is here. In reality, it is up there where this map is showing you. This map comes from the National Park Service website. But for some reason, the National Geographic map says the trail starts down there. And that just confuses me. But anyway, Boycourt Trail, it says 0.3 mile out and back, but that's the paved section of the trail. It definitely goes further. And then there's other things that reach off and down and whatever else. One of the coolest things I thought was there's a burning coal vein there. And so I got a few pictures and I started thinking in my mind, I was like, I really need to get down there. And just wondering, is it safe to even get down there? And so I walked down the trail a little bit. I was like, yeah, I'll be able to do it. It was a little too late for me because I had some sunrise shots, which we're not seeing here because, again, I had to weed something out. But I had some sunrise shots and a few other shots. But this is a nice zoomed in of just the coal burning there in the visible from the Boycourt Trail. This, incidentally, this shot is actually a composite of two shots, where I wanted to bring in just a tiny amount of more smoke in the scene. So you also have, you have this magnificent smoke on the left-hand side. That came in from one frame. And then really what I might suggest is to say the tiny little puff came in from the other frame. But anyway, it doesn't matter which one I brought in from the other frame. It's just that I was like, you know what? I want more of an impact of what that smoke is. And so we have two frames combined here to give us a little more smoke in one frame. A black and white conversion for just after sunrise. Really liked what the sky was doing with those clouds. And then another shot here I want to take a look at. These two shots. We're going to take some details. So let's zoom in here. And again, this is from the Boycourt Trail. And I'm just curious to know, if you want to give me some feedback, you can either make a comment there in the Facebook group, or you are welcome to email me, Brent@latitudephotographypodcast.com. But which image do you like better? This image where we have a little sliver of the sky up there in the upper right-hand corner, or this image where we're zoomed in just a little bit and we get rid of that sky? Personally, I kind of like them both. And I have a feeling I'm going to vote myself. I don't know if I should even tell you this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you this. But I welcome you. Just tell me what you like better. I like the one with the sky in there. Oftentimes, I will say, no, give me that abstraction. Give me less information to be concerned about. I want to look at these other things and just focus in on these other things, these details of the landscape. Where this, when I have that sky in there, just up in a little bit, I've got all these trees, all these hills, these land formations, the highlights, the shadows, so much stuff going on. Do I really need that little extra bit? Well, that little extra bit does provide a sort of a sense of scale, a sense of depth is probably the better way to put it. So it provides that sense of depth to the scene because we can now get a sense of it going off into the horizon. It also gives us a sense, just an idea of level of what is the appropriate, what's the word I'm looking for? The appropriate stance, the appropriate positioning of the landscape. Of course, you can look at the trees and hopefully their trunks are going straight up, but they're really small. And if it were to be off kilter one way or the other by half a degree or a degree of angle, you know, the trees, you're not going to be able to tell that much. But with land and the horizon, I think that's a little easier to discern. But I think also in this in the second framing here, because we have this big black cave, it feels like, in the right-hand side of the frame, that to me becomes too strong of an element when I get rid of the sky. And so I do like this cropping. I do like the other cropping better where we have the sky, because it just balances out and it becomes more, I'm more interested in looking at the trees and the little implied line that comes in from the bottom and points up a little bit towards the left. And then you're launched towards the upper right where the sky is. Whereas in this frame with the sky cropped out, you don't have that exact journey. The traveling that the viewer takes is just different, and it really hovers about that black hole, that gravity well that is that black hole in the central right-hand side of the frame, vertically central roughly, and then off to the right-hand side. So that's my reasoning for why I like the other image better. And you're going to find other images like this next one, where I preferred it without the horizon showing. And we just didn't need it. I saw it as a distraction, and so I eliminated it. And here we're able to focus purely just on the subjects, on the land formations and the differences of what we have, whether it's the white sands below, the erosion happening on the left-hand side, the rolling hills in the background, and the transition thereof as it morphs from one thing to the next. So it certainly is. It's not something where I'm always going to say, eliminate your horizons when you're shooting a landscape from above. Sometimes it just works out where you need it, in my opinion. All right, this next one, also from the Boycott Trail. This is the Boycott Trail. I also went back for the evening. And so we're looking at evening shots now. And the Boycott Trail was, this was Wednesday evening, by the way, very prolific as it relates to just this vast panorama of good things to photograph, basically. And I was just really excited about this place. And I actually came here a total of 4 times during my time here at the park. It was just a really awesome place. I think it was 4 times. Zooming in on some detail in this right-hand image where we have that difference of, that reddish sandstone layer where it has a different erosion pattern, a different erosion, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to use the word technique, but just it's a more solid piece of grain, a more solid piece of mineral, and it just doesn't erode at the same rate as the other items erode, the other clay erodes at. And so it just made an interesting slice through this otherwise common erosion pattern. And then, of course, with the image on the left, focusing more in on just that one hill, getting the rolling hills behind, was what this image was about. And then finally, some sunset type images as the sun is heading over. And then the color just went, and it was just awesome. And so this shot, I have 2 shots here from sunset and with all the awesome color. And this shot is actually a composite, if you will. It's an exposure blend using the Lumenzia plugin, or Lumenzia extension, I should say, for Photoshop, to bring these 2 items together. And let me talk a little bit about that process. It is something that's, I guess you could say, relatively new to me, because I usually like to try and get everything in one frame and not worry about all the extra Photoshop work. But when you have to go to Photoshop, then you just have to, right? And I actually have another one later from Painted Canyon that we'll look at where I did the same idea. So we have a 1/50 of a second. So 1/50 of a second for the sky in this image, and then a 1/6 of a second for the foreground. And then I blended it. But with the blending that happened in Photoshop, definitely it's about blending it and not bringing in the full-on 1/6 of a second. It would have just been too bright and would have felt unnatural. And so I put it on this black background because it is such a dark image. I really wanted it to just shine for what it is and let it be undistracted from all these other accoutrements that would end up being in the frame. But I also then wanted to show it as the original square format, because not only is this that luminosity masking exposure blend, I then took another shot to make it a vertical pano, 2-frame vertical pano. So I then had that going on there too. It was just, it was great. Incidentally, I made this a video in my Latitude Photo School, which we'll talk about in a few seconds, but basically just going through the entire process of how that was done. All right, this next image is just a few moments after. The sun was continuing to go down, but of course that meant the light was spreading across a little more, but of course it's getting darker as the sun is going down. So this one is a single frame at about 1/8 of a second. So if you recall, the previous one, the foreground was at 1/6 of a second. And you might be thinking like, well, Brent, this doesn't look that much more brighter. And again, remember, this looks a lot brighter compared to the foreground to foreground from that previous image. And that is because, like I had mentioned, I had grafted that other foreground in on that background image, and it just didn't come in at the full value. I didn't want it to come in at its full brightness amount. So in this image, everything is overall just a little bit brighter, but it's a single frame done mostly in Lightroom. I did bring it in Photoshop to just bring in a little color where we started losing some of that color in the brightest areas of the sky. I just was able to bring in just a tiny amount of color to keep it from blowing out by doing that in Photoshop. Just a quick mention here about my Latitude Photography School. It is the program that I have that provides you a challenge that you need to sharpen your skills and to help you develop into the photographer you want to be. The biggest thing I want to get across with Latitude Photography School, yes, I have lessons in there, I have some courses in there, but I want it to be viewed as you get an opportunity to really look at your work and look at what you're doing with your photography. And then I'm going to help you make the changes you need, whether it's just building your skills or maybe it's all about outlook and all about understanding the approach overall to photography. Maybe it's all that combined, and encouraging you, getting you out there to just shoot more pictures and to keep refining your process and keep elevating and improving and advancing in the photography process and in ultimately, of course, in the ending results that you make. So check it out there on the website, just brentbergherm.com. You could also type in latitudephotography.school.com and it'll forward you right there. And I do want to also make sure you're aware we have a price increase happening January 2. So it's going to go up to $29 a month. And the biggest reason we're doing that is because we're going to be doing 2 group sessions each month. So starting in February 2022, we're going to be doing 2 group sessions each month, and we're going to be able to come together and look at your images, push you further, keep you getting that feedback, keep you learning, keep you growing in your photography. And also, I'm doing a thing where I'm supporting a charity with the revenues generated from the Latitude Photography School. So look at all the details. There are one or two little caveats there, but basically looking at supporting a charity, some humanitarian efforts with that. And so I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And if that's something that you're interested in knowing more about, take a look at the website, brentbergherm.com/charity, and you'll find out everything there is to know about that. All right, back to the pictures. Thursday morning. All right, went back to the Painted Canyon and got some images. So this next shot is one of the ones I kind of told you I talk about, and that is the exposure blending once again using Lumenzia. Such a fantastic and relatively easy to use piece of software, a little extension there for Photoshop. And it has just recently been updated for use on the new MacBook Pros, the M1 MacBook Pros, or any M1 architecture for the Mac system. I'm still on an Intel-based computer, so, whatever, not a big deal. But for those of you that are on the M1 systems already, it runs natively in Photoshop, and now Lumenzia runs natively too. And that's just super efficient, super good stuff to have all these capabilities supporting natively the new architecture, the new stuff going on with the Apple chips. But anyway, about this image, oh man, what a fun shoot. Decided, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I've just got a couple of mornings left. I was like, you know what? Painted Canyon was so awesome. I want to go back there and hopefully get some good color. Because I had taken this little trail loop that they had, that's where I got the previous fall color you had seen, went and took a look at this particular area where I got down the first morning, the first afternoon I was there, the first evening I was there. And I decided, well, let's go back to this particular trail and canyon rim overlook, and let's take a look at what we can do for sunrise. So here we go. Brilliant color for sunrise. This is 2 different exposures. I didn't take note of what the values were, but I then went and played around a little bit within Lumenzia. You can do a color range selection. So it uses Photoshop's color range selector, and then it gives you a special selection very easily and conveniently. You can do this outside of Lumenzia. It's just Lumenzia makes it easier. So Lumenzia is like something that works with the user interface, and it just makes these things that you can already do in Photoshop a lot easier and a lot more efficient. And so what I was able to do, I was able to just grab a little, basically the warm hues down there in the trees and say, let me select just that. And then I'm going to manipulate that within my image, manipulate those items only, using the selection based off of the brightness values, or in this case, the color values and the brightness values of those objects. And when you have a selection that is based off of, in this case, the color, when you have the more accurate, shall we say, color, you have more of that selection. So the power is coming through, if you will, of the painted brush when you're painting on something, or when you're masking something. And then when you have something that's not quite that same color or luminance value, it diminishes in that selection. So the power of your brush is held back in those areas. And so you get a much more natural feeling effect, a much more natural delivery of what you're trying to do with the subject at hand. And it just works really well. And it's just, if you haven't done it, I say dive into it. Greg Benz is the publisher of Lumenzia. He's got a course that you could take. And of course you can be a part of Latitude Photo School. We'll be rolling more out over the next weeks and months in this genre. But if you wanted to just dive in deep, then I say just go for Greg's program. That's fine. But it then allowed me to just bring the tiniest amount of extra highlights just in those trees, which really set this image off. It was very subtle, but it just really just pushed it over the edge and made it just exactly what it needed to be. Then I'm certainly able to bring in the foreground, matching it with the background. And it's just, in my opinion, it's just a brilliant image. I really do love this image. So I had that other image from Boycourt Trail, but really this one is really floating my boat too. I just love how this is coming together. In the other image from Boycourt Trail, the sunset image, I do appreciate the horizon a little better because a little more contours in the horizon. But this one with those trees and the way that's coming, it's just gorgeous. Now I did have the foresight also to grab a shot of this after the sun had risen, so those trees could be extra lit. And I haven't experimented with that yet, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to work out because my positioning, I had gone over here, I'd come back and whatever else. So my positioning just wasn't the exact same. And so the alignment and everything just isn't going to work. I could do a full-on replacement, but it's nice when you have it tripod mounted and you can blend in the darker frame with the brighter frame and you just have all of those elements aligned up. In this case, the wind isn't blowing, so the leaves and the trees are not an issue. Otherwise, they do definitely become an issue, and you want to be concerned about that. All right, a few more pictures from Painted Canyon sunrise, just before the sun crests the horizon, basically. On the left-hand side, just those rolling hills, or more than rolling hills. We have these eroded badlands with a few rolling hill kind of items. And in the right-hand picture, I really liked how this came together because this is not only a vertical panorama, but it's also a focus stack. So that's foreground with these grasses in the foreground with the going over the cliff's edge. And then what you see down below is actually a focus stack. And I did a little image comparison in the Facebook group, and you're able to see the detail of how bad Photoshop does when you're doing a focus stack versus Helicon Focus. Helicon Focus is amazing at doing focus stackings. And I'm going to turn that into the next piece that I'm doing for my email list. So if you're not on my email list, there's going to be a link here in the description or in the show notes, and you'll be able to click on that item. It's just, I think I call it basic notifications. And so you're going to be getting a notification every 6 to 8 weeks. And these are the types of things where I like to make it really valuable and really just jam-packed with good information. And so the first one came out a little bit ago, somewhere at the time of this recording, about 3 weeks ago. And then you'll have a link at the bottom of the all future emails saying, hey, if you didn't download it, here you go. And if you're already a part of my list, so there's about 300 or more of you already on my list, you're going to already get these new items that I send out as well. So get signed up on that item. You'll be able to read it there in the email. You'll be able to download a PDF of it. And hopefully you'll find those things valuable to just say, hey, here's a little extra few little tidbits of items where you can learn this process. You can learn the story behind the image, whatever it's going to end up turning out to be. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and focus on this notion of focus stacking and what that's all about and how it compares to the Photoshop to Helicon Focus. All right, and then just an overall broad image with all that gorgeous light coming in on the clouds. Just wonderful, good stuff. And then as the sun came up, it was like, okay, let's get down a little bit into the canyon and photograph some of the colors. So here we just have a few images of just some of the gorgeous fall color coming in. A few, zooming in, getting a little bit of detail coming through, especially like this one, just isolating and getting in on those trunks, getting in on those bright colored leaves. And the green leaves at the bottom, the orange leaves, the yellow leaves, just a beautiful transition. Really pleased with how the details come out in some of these types of images. So on Thursday afternoon, this is when I went to the Petrified Forest. So you can see again on the map, I stayed at Cottonwood. I did not hike all the way there. That would have been more than 12-ish, 13-ish miles. So I got in the car, got on the highway, went west one exit, and then drove about 5 miles. And then as you can see where the little orange fellow there with a backpack is positioned, there's a trail that leads off to the west. And so you walk in, it's about 2 miles, 2.5 miles from the parking lot to these locations that we're going to be seeing here. And this was also a very prolific area, lots of awesome things to photograph. These stumps, though, this item right in the center of the frame, this is the petrified tree stump. And hopefully you'll agree, but to me, that does not look like a stump. There are others that look like stumps, and so we'll see those in a moment. But these are some of that Badlands formations. But then we have these petrified tree items that are just strewn about. And you can see on the left-hand side of this image, all of those little rocky type items, those are just fragments of the petrified tree. We have big fragments, but most of them are just small, crunchy fragments. And then, of course, this cave, this whatever that is, had to get a detail shot of that. And then I turned to black and white. I just thought that was so interesting. And it's also, to me, it was very inviting. I was just like, that would be so cool to get in there, like if it's raining or something, to just get in there. I didn't, but it would be fun to play a little bit. Now on these shots, these are really small little cave items along this difference, again, the difference in the stone. So a different erosion that's happening. And in these different 3 images, you can see again with that, with those reddish type stones embedded in the clay, those are going to be a mixture of that sandstone that is a little more hard and it doesn't erode quite as much as the clay does. But also then we have some of those petrified tree bits going in there. And let's look at 2 of these other images in a little more detail. So I'm going to start off with this one. These 2 are my favorite images of this particular area. This one it's interesting. Those of us in Western societies, we start reading upper left, if we were to read something, right? And so if this image were to be a little extra strong, I liked this piece down in the lower right-hand corner, which anchors it, but it still isn't this is where you start idea. You still start, I think, on that row of rocks, and you start on the left hand, you go up towards the center of the image, and then you kind of work your way back down where the water has flowed through. And then you're just kind of going in a little bit of a circle there. Well, this next image pretty much does the same thing as far as your starting point, but then you go from the central left, you go up into the upper center, and then you just kind of fall down to the lower right where there's just a bunch of negative space. And so I liked these two different takes on this same subject and just wanted to share them with you here. All right, more of this idea of the wood fragments that have been petrified. And here they're just a whole bunch of them, conglomerating together. I just particularly liked how these two were pointing down roughly to that plant that's growing, the new plants, the new growth, and the extremely old ancient stuff. I just thought that was kind of fun. So that's why I took this image, created this image. And this next image, you have that juxtaposition as well with the shrub and then this big solid piece of rock, which used to be a tree. But for some reason, I just think of this one as one of those types of images that you might see in a gallery, huge and just massive impact that it might have. And it's that kind of image where at least I would question to say, why is that even here? Because the subject just doesn't come across as being that intriguing and that worthy, shall I say, of this massive attention. But it's still, I want to see it that way. For some reason, it's just one of those types of subjects that says, yes, this probably would elevate and just go bonkers. Maybe it needs a little more vignetting in the corner or something to darken the corners just a hair, the edges and corners just a hair. But otherwise, it would just go bonkers in a huge setting like that, in a huge print like that. And so I envision myself in the art show that I'm going to be producing here. What is it going to be? It's either at the end of February or the beginning of March. Anyway, I see this one probably potentially becoming a fairly large print, just so I can communicate that idea of look at the detail, look at the intricacies of all the lichen, all the textures, and then, of course, the juxtaposition of the ancient, the very dead and ancient, and then you have, for some reason, right between that and the greenery, you have this dead twig, this dead set of the bush there, and then you have the new growth. And there's just something there that I think is extremely interesting with that message as well. All right, a little bit of the plant life just coming straight out of the clay, growing over this rock, and then just so interesting. And then all that texture down in that clay. There's just so much interest there in a place like this, the Petrified Forest at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Now, here's some of the stumps that totally look like stumps. And it starts to also make you think, too, about the nature of the place and what it would probably look like. And there was, at the trailhead, there's a sign there that says, this place, back in the day, I forget exactly what they said. For me, I would say before the flood, but others would say millions and billions of years ago. So whatever. The sign was saying that it was like, it would be like what the Everglades in Florida are now. And when you see the stumps like this, it was like, yeah, that's pretty cool, because they were just going to be massive, and they were just, the root systems and all. Oh, it'd just be amazing to see all of that. But I really liked in this first image the little cactus down in down in the center, lower part of the center there. I just thought that was really cool for some reason to have that little cactus coming in. This one I really liked, so I also had to convert it to black and white. I just think it worked really well with the clouds and everything else like that. And it almost feels like I've done some kind of odd selection to make it just jump off and radiate off from the background. And I promise you, I didn't do that. The black and white conversion did all of that. And I didn't swing anything vastly one way or the other. I probably told it to, brighten or darken just a little bit, but nothing was vastly swung one way or the other either. But it just has that, I don't know, to me, it just has that uplifting effect. But what is hard in this particular image to see, what is hard, there is actually one of those shrubs growing right in the cauldron of the stump. And I do have a closer in image, not to show you today, but I do have a closer in image of that. And I just loved that idea of that new growth coming out of this ancient death, this ancient dead piece. And then, of course, this last one where we just have the angle, the erosion patterns that are coming through, the lines leading up to it. Just a lot of cool stuff here. And then my favorite of all the Petrified Forests coming up here now. This was so cool, just having this thing receding away and just all these stumps. And you can see like that one that's roughly in the center, how everything is eroding away from underneath it. And a lot of them are that way, actually. And so eventually these things will topple over because there's going to be so much erosion that's happening that it can't hold it up anymore. But for what we have now, it's just really cool stuff. And you can walk throughout all this whole thing. It's just, it's a really great place. This was the northern section, by the way. If you go to the Petrified Forest at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, there are two pieces. When you come out on that trail, you go north or you go south. I chose to go to the north one because the rangers told me that there was just more there. It was a bigger place. So I decided to go there. All right. Then, of course, the sun started to set, got some great color coming through. And I really liked this formation. As I was walking out, I was like, boy, I wish I could think of something to frame up here and get this to work out really well. And then sunset happened. I was like, yeah, that's going to be pretty cool at sunset. And then I got this one as it set just a little bit more. And I'm really pleased with how this one came together. Not only the color, but just the texture and the exposure otherwise. It's all in a single frame, came out beautifully. I did use Lightroom's new masking functions to grab a shadows selection and be able to affect those to create a little more contrast by darkening just the deep, deep shadows. And again, you could say, Brent, can't you just slide the blacks slider? Yes, but if you wanted to isolate it in just a certain area, you make a shadows selection, you then tell it to intersect, let's say with a brush selection, then it only goes where those two things intersect. And then you can affect just the shadows areas underneath that row of rock, let's say, that's being supported up by these clay items that are still there. That's just good stuff. You can't go wrong with that. All right, the final day of shooting, Friday morning, went back to Boycourt Trail. And this is where I wanted to get down to where that coal was burning. So you can see here in the central upper portion of the image, there's a little bit of a wisp of smoke, but the horses were there. And I was just like, oh, awesome, this will be great. And so I got a few images of the horses. I really liked this one, where the horse, he's looking straight at me, but we've got that awesome Badlands formation right behind it. And then a little bit of elements here in the foreground, giving us a perfect layering, framing effect. Really pleased how this one came through. No action. The horse isn't doing anything but looking at me, but that's all right. It came through okay anyway. And then these shots, these are not intended to be like, oh, look at these beautiful images. I just wanted to show you the nature of the land and the nature of two frames right close to each other and how different the smoke can be. So you can think back to that other frame where I said, hey, I brought two together. Well, I didn't see it as hugely, trying to convince you that there's something nefarious going on. I still wanted to, talk about it and say, hey, this is what I did. But it's just the nature of the smoke in different frames can have different senses and whatnots. So anyway, down there in that, where that earth has fallen away, that's where the coal is and that's where it's burning. And then you also have some areas like this where you can see it just really collapsing. And that falls about, 8 to 12 feet or so in overall. But this rim of coal, as you can follow it along from where I'm standing, up and around, and it goes off to the right and up the hill. So it actually goes up this Badlands formation and it's burning all around. So it started there somehow in the center, and it's just radiating outwards and burning as it radiates outwards. And it's just a really slow burn, a little bit of a sulfurous smell, but otherwise you're good to go. And as long as you don't stick your nose way down in there and take a big whiff, I would think you're going to probably be okay and not get sick or nothing. Time to come out and looking back, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. All that smoke being backlit by the sunrise light that has finally come over those hills now. And yeah, that was pretty sweet stuff. All right, that is the last picture from Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Boy, howdy, I had a lot. This was the most prolific, the longest time I spent in any one location, but it was well worth it. I was so pleased with the images I was able to make, and it was a delight not only to shoot, but also to relive these in post-production, and then, of course, here in this presentation, showing you these images. I want to tell you briefly about my workshop that's happening in the Palouse here in June of 2022, June 13 through 17, 2022. We are going to go out and shoot. Like I kind of mentioned before with the idea of Latitude Photo School, you're going to be challenged. We're going to look at your compositional experience. We're going to look at all the items as it relates to your experience and your process of your creativity. We're then going to look at all the post-production side of things. If you want to be thinking about getting good prints, especially, that's what we're going to be doing. Now, here's the thing. Getting good prints, maybe that doesn't really excite you, and I can totally understand that. But the post-processing we're going to learn in order to get good prints is going to set you so far. If you haven't done that kind of stuff, you're going to be so far advanced anyway. And you'll just have much better images because you'll be able to really hone it in with that post-processing. Also, this isn't about just printing your own images. You might be thinking, oh, that's just for people who want to buy their own printer and print their own images. That's not the case. The techniques are the same, though, if you're going to be going to an online lab. You want to be able to know what the process is to properly process images in order to get wonderfully consistent results from your online lab. And that's what I teach you how to do in this workshop. And so I would love to have you join me there and the other photographers there in the Palouse. It's limited to 5 participants only. And so we're going to be there for 4.5, 5 days of shooting, 3 days of printing, and we're going to have a great time just diving in so deep and getting some amazing images, and then, of course, getting some gallery quality prints from those images. I do have a few affiliate links. I really appreciate those of you who are using them. I'm just thrilled about that. Now, Lens Rentals has a great link there for anything that you want to rent, whether it's for the holidays that are coming up or down the line. Maybe it's June, maybe it's September next year, whatever the case is. They are the best place, in my opinion, to go and rent your gear. I have certainly used them frequently, and I encourage you to consider them if you're looking to rent some gear. And if you would do the extra effort to click that link, I would so appreciate it because it does send a few dollars my way, and I really do appreciate that. I also have links for Think Tank Photo and Peak Design. Now, the thing with Peak Design, I have used one of their bags especially. It's their shoulder bag, everyday 13-inch shoulder bag. Really nice if you're looking for a slim design bag, especially if you're shooting mirrorless. But if you got a DSLR, it can work for some DSLRs too. I didn't like it so much with my Canon 5D Mark IV. That was just a little bit too big. But with the smaller bodies, it just doesn't have as much girth, I guess you can say, so it pushes it out and it just would tip over. But with the smaller bodies, like the R5, and if you got an R6, or if you have one of the smaller DSLRs, it'll work perfectly for you. And they have a 15-inch bag too. But if you want the smaller bag like I like, the 13 inches, where it holds a 13-inch notebook, that's what I measure that off of. Good, definitely good bag. And they're having some sales for Black Friday, Cyber Monday that are starting tomorrow. So today, as I record this, is the 21st, Sunday. So starting tomorrow and Monday, you can click that link and you can then see what all their sales are about. They're going to have it on their website and all that good stuff. I do get a commission from that too, and I appreciate it. So with Think Tank Photo, I do use those a bit more frequently with the backpack style that I have, two of theirs. And that's an affiliate link too, and you get free shipping from their website and a free gift at checkout. And then, of course, I've talked a little bit about Lumenzia, and so I have a link there. It is also an affiliate link with Greg Benz's Lumenzia extension for Photoshop. And if that's something that you're interested in getting into, I highly recommend thinking about Lumenzia as your luminosity masking panel of choice. It's super easy. Once you get just a little bit, watch his videos, maybe some other resources you might be able to find too. But once you get the lay of how this thing is laid out, is all of a sudden it just starts to make sense. And that's just brilliant. I love how easy it is for it to just all of a sudden make sense. And then how extensive it is. There's so many things you can do with it, with fine-tuning your selection. And that's the key, learning how to fine-tune your selection. So look those up in the show notes or in the description here on YouTube, or again, the show notes in your listener app or on the website here on YouTube, wherever you're consuming this information, this content, and that will do it for us. Of course, I have other links there for where to find me online, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, etc. I encourage you to take a look at those. I really appreciate that. And as we are looking forward to the new year, I just want to encourage y'all, have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a fantastic Christmas, and a happy new year. I'm going to keep producing some shows, certainly from here on out, but I just want to make sure I don't miss an opportunity to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. And as we look forward to Christmas and all the rest, it's just going to be a wonderful time of year, and I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Thanks so much for being here. I hope you can get out and shoot sometime soon. And don't forget, submit those images from your whole experience over 2021, where we're just hoping to see some images coming through in the Facebook group. 10 to 20 images that represent your best work. And remember, help us understand, how did you grow throughout this year in your photography? That would just be great to be able to see and to be able to know your growth experience in your photography throughout this year. Thanks so much. We'll catch you next time. Until then, happy shooting.